Hello, ghouls, and welcome back to another dream story. So tomorrow is the dream class. I'm preparing my slides as we speak. Well, not as we speak, but as soon as we finish speaking, I'll go back to it. But I'm taking a quick break to tell you another story. It's a very short one today. If you remember, back when I read you the first story this week, I said that by the 19th century, you quite often get in Gothic novels a fairly self-conscious presentation of differing interpretations, some medicalized and some theological. But it's not simply a theology versus medical. There are various medical ones, options, various non-supernatural explanations. And there are also various theological or supernatural explanations which can be applied to the dream. And in some texts, as with the text that we're going to read today, those can be mixed and brought forward quite overtly by the author. The story I'm reading today is James Hogg's A Singular Dream from 1811. And it's quite a funny story. You'll see what I mean in a second. But it's also one that I think is quite rich in terms of dream theory, or the dream theory which it points us towards and perhaps points us away from. Mixing a sort of comic bathos with a more sort of chilling, not creepy, but chilling theological understanding of what's occurring. Anyway, let's get on with it. And at the end, I'll talk to you a little bit about the different ideas of the dream that we get appearing in the story. Singular Dream from a correspondent. The other night, on my way home after a fatiguing day, I stumbled into the house of an old acquaintance, on purpose to rest myself, as well as to find amusement in his conversation until my usual time of going to bed. This friend of mine is a phenomenon of wisdom and foresight. He keeps a weekly, if not daily, register of all the undermining and unmannerly actions practiced by the men and women of this metropolis and its environs, as far as his information serves him. And he spares no pains to gain that information, and consequently can, when he pleases, retell all the incidents that have led to the births, marriages, and deaths for 20 years bygone, as well as to all the failures in business, most of which he foresaw and prognosticated with the greatest punctuality. In a short time, I was struck with astonishment at the man's amazing discernment, for though we were fellow collegians and have long been known to one another, we have not been in habits of intimacy. And I did not used to hear him mentioned by associates with half so much deference as it appeared to me he was entitled to. I set him down in my mind as a most useful member of society, and from his extraordinary powers of estimating human characters and human actions aright, one whom it would be wisdom for all men, both high and low, to consult before they performed any permanent connection, or entered upon any undertaking of moment. Impelled by a curiosity too natural of seeing into futurity, I soon began to consult him about the affairs of the nation, and what was most likely to be the result of the present stagnation of trade and measures of government. My heart thrills with horror to this hour when I reflect upon the authentic and undeniable information which I receive from him. We are all in the very jaws of destruction. Our trade, our liberties, our religion, heaven be our God, our religion and all are hanging by one slender thread, which the flames of hell have already reached, and will soon singe in two. This was a shocking piece of intelligence for me, who had always cherished the fond idea that we were the most thriving and flourishing people on the face of the whole earth. When I was a young man, the several classes of society in this country were not half so well fed, clothed, or educated as they now are. What could I think but that we were a thriving and happy people? But instead of that, we are ruined bankrupts, prodigals, depraved reprobates, and the slaves of sin and Satan. Much need of the people of this land to be constantly upon their watchtowers, having their lamps trimmed and their beacons burning. For indeed there is not one thing as it appears to be. Our liberty is a flam, our riches a supposition, and the banknotes, in fact, not worth a halfpenny apiece. Improvements in the arts and sciences, or in rural and national economy, are no sign of prosperity, but quite the reverse. And would you believe it, there are some gentlemen high in office whom I and most of the nation have always regarded as men of the utmost probity. Oh, Lord help us, they're nothing better than confounded rascals. Oh, that we were wise and that we understood this. Taught thus by incontrovertible arguments that the end of all things, at least with respect to Britain, was at hand, I gladly relinquished the disagreeable topic and introduced the affairs of this city. Yet I confess I did it with a good deal of diffidence, having learned to distrust my own powers of perception altogether, and consequently knew how unfit I was to judge of anything from appearance. But how shall I ever describe to you the deformed picture which was now for the first time placed before my astonished view? It is impossible, for it was one huge mass of inconsistence. I was plainly told that our magistrates are no magistrates, but that they only suppose themselves so, that they're a set of gossiping, gormandizing puppies, that they are fast bringing the city to ruin, which must soon come to the hammer and be sold to the highest bidder, that our ministers of the gospel are no ministers of the gospel, they're drunkards, wine-bibbers, and friends of publicans and sinners. There is not one sentence of pure gospel preached amongst them all, and the holy sacraments are degenerated into a mere mock or matter of form, which those only condescend to accept who, unable to preserve a character for anything else, endeavour to scratch one up for devotion. What a miserable state our church must be in, thought I, when the boar that from the forest comes doth waste it at its pleasure. I beg your pardon, sir. It's not meaning you. In the High Court of Session, too, where I supposed everything to have been decided with equity and conscience, all is, it seems, conducted by intrigue, and the springs of justice directed by self-interest alone. But that which grieved me most of all was what he told me of our ladies, those sweet, those amiable creatures, which I had always fondly viewed as that link in the chain of creation which connected the angelic with the human nature. But alas, sir, it seems that it is too true what Burns says. There are in whores and jades together. For my friend assured me that they are all slaves to the worst of passions, and that they neither think nor act as if they were accountable creatures. He said that none of them ever employed a thought on anything better than by what means she might get a husband, or how most to plague one after she had him. And that when they were not ruminating on the one or the other of these, it was sure to be on something worse. And he cited an old foolish Roman in confirmation of his theory, who says, mulier quae sola cogitat, male cogitat. In translation, a woman who thinks alone thinks badly. About this time another gentleman entered, who was without doubt come for the same purpose with myself, namely, to learn how mankind were behaving themselves on an average. And as he took up the conversation, I remained silent, as indeed I had done for the most part of the time since I entered. My ideas being wound up to the highest pitch of rueful horror, I fell into a profound reverie, and from thence into a sound sleep, in which it seems I continued for nearly half an hour, and might have continued much longer if they had not awakened me, on perceiving that I was labouring under the most painful sensations. The truth is, though I did not like to tell them all at that time, I had been engaged in a dreadful dream. There's an old Scotch proverb that one had better dream of the devil than the minister, but I dreamed of them both, and mixed them so completely together that they seemed to be one and the same person. Well, that's no accounting for the vagaries of fancy in the absence of reason. I thought I was in a country church, where you have often been, sir, and that I'd just taken my seat in the pew where you and I have often sat and sung bass to the old tunes which our old precentor lilted over to us, when who should I see mount the pulpit to preach but the very identical friend who sat discoursing beside me, and who had so lately opened my eyes to our ruined and undone state. He read out a text from the Scriptures with great boldness. I forgot what he said it was, for indeed I thought he did not name the right book, but I remember some of the words, which run thus: because our daughters are haughty and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go and making a tripping with their feet. He read it twice over, and then I heard a tittering noise. When looking over my shoulder, I saw the church filled with the most beautiful women I'd ever beheld in my life. I wept to think how bad, miserable creatures they all were, that so much wickedness should be concealed under so sweet a veil, that their parents should have been at so much pains, bringing up so many pests to society and objects fitted for destruction. But the more I looked at them, they became the more lovely, and the more I looked at the preacher, he became the more ugly, until I could no longer look at him without terror. At length, a tall lady stretched forward her head and whispered to me that he was the devil. I uttered a loud scream and hid myself behind the pew, having a peculiar aversion to that august personage. And peeping through a hole, I beheld him change his form gradually from that of a human creature into a huge black sow. He then stepped down from the pulpit with some difficulty and began feeding out of a deep trough. A thought struck me in a moment, that I might easily rid mankind of their greatest enemy by felling him at one blow before he observed me, for his head was quite out of sight. So snatching down a grave pole, I glided silently away to execute my cowardly purpose. When I came within stroke, I heaved my grave pole and collected my whole force for the blow. "I'll do for you now, old boy," said I to myself. At that very moment, he lifted his ugly phiz and gave me such a look that I was quite overcome with terror and fled yelling along the area, and the devil after me. My knees grew extremely weak, and besides, I was so entangled among women and petticoats that I sunk powerless to the earth, and Satan got hold of me by the arm. My friend, at that unlucky moment, observing my extraordinary agitation, took hold of my arm and awaked me. My scattered senses not having got time to collect, I still conceived him to be the devil, and remembering the text, "Resist the devil and he will fly from you," I attacked my astonished friend with the most determined fury, boxing him unmercifully on the face, and uttering the most dreadful imprecations, resolved, it seems, that he should not consult me or take me away with impunity. The other gentleman interfered and brought me to my senses. "What do you mean by such a rude and beastly attack, sir?" said my friend, while the blood poured from his nose. "Oh, I most humbly beg your pardon, sir," said I, "but indeed I thought you were the devil." "Upon my word, a very extraordinary excuse," said he. "I know I never had any great share of beauty to boast of, but I'm not just so ugly as to be taken for the devil, neither, and I'm certainly entitled to expect an apology, both for your mad assault and the whimsical excuse you have made for it." He accompanied this sentence with a look so malicious and, as I imagined, so like a fiend, that I was utterly disconcerted, and could only add by way of palliation that I believed I did not know what I was doing. So bowing, I walked off rather abruptly, accompanied by the other gentleman, who was ready to burst with laughter all the way down the stairs. When we got to the street, "Well," said he, "our friend certainly was to blame, but you have without doubt carried the jest rather too far. I believe, after all, that he has been speaking the truth of you, which has caused you to take it so ill." "Speaking the truth of me?" exclaimed I. "What do you mean? I hope he was not assailing my character and foreboding my ruin while I was asleep." "Aye, that's very good," said he, laughing. "That's very good indeed. So you were indeed sleeping, and did not hear a word he said?" "Oh, upon my honour, I did not hear a word that he said," returned I. "Oh, that's rather too bad, my dear sir," said he, continuing to laugh immoderately. "Why, what the devil was it then that offended you, and induced you to give him such a drubbing?" "Oh, the devil I believe it was," said I, and then began a long bungling story about my dream, at which he only laughed the more, being firmly established in the belief that the sleep was a sham, and the assault intentional, or at least that it was the consequence of my having been irritated past bearing by his injurious reflections. Now, as this business is soon to be made public by being discussed in a court of justice, I entreat you to reserve a place in your book of tales for this letter, which I declare to you, upon my honour, contains the real and fair statement of the facts as they followed one upon another. I am cited to answer for entering the house of Mr. A.T., philosopher and teacher of the science of chance, without any previous invitation, interpellation, or intimation, but with an intention, as it would appear, of wounding, bruising, maiming, and taking away the life of the aforesaid A.T., philosopher and teacher of the science of chance, and for most feloniously, maliciously, and barbarously threatening, cursing, and striking the said Mr. A.T., philosopher and teacher of the science of chance, to the effusion of his blood, the damage of his person and clothes, and the endangerment of his life, and that without any provocation on the part of the foresaid A.T. philosopher and foresaid aforesaids. Yet, notwithstanding of all this, and though my counsel assures me that I will be found liable in expenses to a high amount, I hereby declare to you and to the world that I am conscious of no evil intention with regard to my friend the philosopher. I went with an intention of receiving amusement and instruction from his conversation. I believed all that he told me. I fell asleep, which was certainly a breach of good manners, but what demon put it into my head that he was the devil, I cannot tell. What said, I thought he was, and when a man acts from the best intentions, I do not think he's blameworthy, if the effect should sometimes prove different. It's very hard that a man should be severely fined for resisting the devil when there are so few that give themselves the trouble to do it. It is true that owing to my country education, I'm a little inclined to be superstitious, but I cannot help thinking that the whole of the accident was a kind of judgment inflicted on us both for a dangerous error, on him for abusing so many of the human race behind their backs who were in all probability better than he, and on me for assenting implicitly to all his injurious insinuations. Nay, I would even fain carry the mystery a little further by alleging that a traducer and backbiter is actually a limb or agent of the devil, and that the dream was a whisper conveyed to my fancy by one of those guardian spirits that watch over the affairs of mortal men. The strange combination of ideas which that foolish dream and its concomitant mischiefs have impressed on my mind have besides given me a mortal aversion to the features and looks of my old acquaintance. It has likewise led me often to an examination of the apparent springs of this principle of detraction and foreboding of evil from every action, whether public or private. The more I think of it, the more firmly am I persuaded of its impropriety, and that whatever such foreseers may pretend, if their inferences point only towards evil, it is a symptom of a bad heart. Let no such men be trusted. We can form our opinions of that which we do not know only by placing it in comparison with something that we do know. Whoever therefore is overrun with suspicion and detects or pretends to detect artifice in every proposal must either have learned the wickedness of mankind by experience, or he must derive his judgment from the consciousness of his own disposition, and impute to others the same inclinations which he feels predominate in himself. Suspicion, however necessary, through ways beset on all sides by fraud and malice, has been always considered, when it exceeds the common measure, as a token of depravity. It is a temper so uneasy and restless that it is very justly appointed the concomitant of guilt. It is an enemy to virtue and to happiness, for he that is already corrupt will naturally be suspicious, and he that becomes suspicious will quickly be corrupt. I was for the space of 20 years intimately acquainted with an old man named Adam Bryden, whose disposition and rule of behaviour were widely different from those of the philosopher above mentioned, and I feared too many of the inhabitants of the metropolis. It was a maxim with him, which though never avowed, was easily discovered, that if he could not say well of a person, he said nothing of them at all. Of the characters of the fair sex he was peculiarly tender in this respect, and always defended them against every probability. When the charges became too evident to be longer denied, he framed the kindest and most tender excuses for them, on account of the simplicity of their hearts and kindness of their natures, which induced them to trust too implicitly to the generosity of others. It was impossible to be long in his company without conceiving a higher opinion of the goodness of the Almighty, of his love and kindness towards his creatures, and of his wisdom displayed in the government of the universe. On the contrary, it is impossible to be long in the company of Mr. A.T. the philosopher, without conceiving that being who is all goodness to be a tyrant, who has created man and women in particular for the sole purpose of working mischief, and then of being punished eternally for that very mischievous disposition which is an ingredient in the composition of their natures. It was impossible to be long in company with the former, without conceiving a higher opinion of the dignity of human nature, and of the happiness attainable by man both in this life and that which is to come. It is impossible to be long in the company of the latter, without conceiving ourselves to be in a world of fiends, who have no enjoyment but in the gratification of sensual appetites, nor any hope but in the ruin of others. Let your readers then, sir, consider seriously which of these two characters appears to be most congenial to a heavenly mind, which of them is most likely to be productive of happiness and contentment in this life, and which of them is most conformable to the precepts left to us by our great lawgiver, in order to fit us for partaking of the blessings of a world to come. Let them weigh all these considerations impartially, and imitate the one or the other, as reason and revelation shall direct. But perhaps those who delight in magnifying the shades in the human character may, in the end, be subjected to pay as dear, if not dearer, for it, than either Mr. A.T. the philosopher, or your humble servant, J.G. It's obviously a sort of moral tale there, and it is quite funny. Various different explanations of the dream are offered overtly within the text. So, first of all, he gives a sort of de-theologized version, but with a very contemporary understanding, or perhaps slightly earlier understanding of the division between reason, will, fancy, during periods of sleep. And so he says there's no accounting for those vagaries of fancy and the absence of reason. So he's suggesting that there is no connection between his reasoning, willing self and the images that arise in his imagination. He then goes on to suggest, when he's questioned what was the cause of the dream, it might have been the devil. And he says that twice. So he appoints it as a demonic dream that led to ill consequences. But then, of course, he turns back at the end and suggests, well, actually, perhaps it was the whisper of a sort of chiding angelic voice for the sin of viewing everyone and everything negatively. There's also the underlying, not overtly stated, but underlying sense that this dream could well be a creation in order to get him off the law case that he's obviously involved in. And particularly the bit where he describes how Mr. A.T. talks about the magistrates when he's quite evidently talking to a magistrate himself. So there is certainly this sort of sly undertone as well that it's quite possibly an invention to get him out of trouble. But what becomes apparent in this story, because of this very kind of clear didactic tone underneath the humor and the irony that occurs, this quite thick irony at the beginning, is that it doesn't necessarily matter if the dream is real or not, or from whence it came, but the results of this real or fake dream are divinely or angelically provided or ordained, because they result in a spiritual revelation. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's quite a funny little story. And I will share one more this week, probably on Sunday, or maybe tomorrow. You never know, I might have time. And hopefully you will enjoy it. And I will see you at the lectures. If you are watching this after Saturday, the 9th of May, then I will be putting up the talks online as well. So do have a look at the rest of my channel. Also, do feel free to have a look below where I have a Ko-fi link, and also feel free to check out the other videos. Bye, ghouls. Have a nice evening.